Amelie was only 24 when she married Kwame, the heir of one of the wealthiest families in Accra. To the world, it looked like she had walked into a fairy tale. Their wedding had been the kind of event that filled glossy magazines, white tents, gold chandeliers, and politicians seated at the front row. People whispered that she was lucky, blessed, chosen. What they didn't see was how heavy that crown of luck truly was. At the center of this powerful family stood Mama Efua, Kwame's mother. Everyone in the city respected her. She donated to churches, built schools in her name, and spoke with the calm authority of a queen. But behind closed doors, her smile was sharp as a knife. She believed money was power, and power belonged only to her and her bloodline. To her, Amelie was nothing more than an outsider who had walked in, and by law, claimed a piece of everything Mama Efua had fought for. The family business, real estate, cocoa exports, oil contracts, was worth millions. By marrying Kwame, Amelie now had rights to a large share of it. On paper, she was protected. In reality, she was in danger. Mama Efua played her part well, hugging Amelie in public, calling her my daughter, and telling guests how proud she was of the woman Kwame chose. But at night, when the doors closed and the guests went home, her eyes hardened. She was already planning how to cut Amelie out, permanently. Amelie felt the tension, though she couldn't yet name it. Something inside her whispered. Love had not saved her. It had led her into the lion's den. When Amelie first entered the Mensa family, she thought the wealth she saw was just what everyone already knew about. Mansions, expensive cars, servants walking quietly through wide marble halls. But after her father-in-law passed away, she learned there was much more hidden beneath the surface. The old man, wise and careful, had left behind a fortune so large it felt unreal. In secret bank accounts, international investments, and properties spread across Ghana and beyond, his estate was worth nearly $100 million. The will was clear. Everything was to be divided fairly among his heirs, and because Amelie was married to Kwame, her name was included in those papers. She wasn't just Kwame's wife anymore. Legally, she was tied to the wealth of the Mensa Empire. To outsiders, this sounded like a blessing, but inside the house, it was the spark that lit a dangerous fire. Mama Efua read the will with eyes that did not blink. In front of lawyers, she nodded gracefully, pretending to accept the decision, but her heart burned with rage. To her, Amelie was an intruder who had stolen her son's affection, and now had the audacity to claim a share of the wealth she believed belonged only to her bloodline. She told herself, this girl did not suffer with us. She did not build with us. She does not deserve one sadi of this fortune. From that day, the air in the mansion grew colder. Conversations became sharp, and silences stretched longer. Kwame, once affectionate, now seemed distant, speaking in hushed tones with his mother whenever Amelie entered the room. At night, Amelie lay awake beside him, her chest heavy, wondering if the man she loved was slowly slipping into his mother's shadow. Amelie wasn't greedy. She didn't care for riches the way the Mensas did. But she couldn't ignore the way the will had changed everything. Her name was a threat to Mama Efua's control. Even when Mama Efua smiled at her across the dinner table, pouring her wine and calling her my daughter, Amelie could feel the truth hiding in those gestures. The kindness was poisoned. The endearments were rehearsed. Soon, she began to notice things. Servants whispering as she passed, doors that closed too quickly, meetings she was never invited to. A maid once slipped and called her, "The one Mama is watching." It chilled her to the bone. She was beginning to realize she wasn't just living with a powerful family. She was living with people who saw her as an enemy inside their walls. Amelie had no proof, only instinct, but she trusted it. Somewhere in her heart, she knew she wasn't just unwanted. She was in danger. The invitation came wrapped in silk. Mama Efua announced it with a wide smile, saying the family deserved a small escape, a celebration of togetherness, after the storm of grief that followed the father-in-law's death. She suggested a private cruise along Cape Coast, where the sea stretched endlessly and the sunsets painted the sky gold. To anyone else, it sounded like a dream. To Amelie, it felt almost too perfect. But when Kwame touched her hand and said, "It will be good for us," she agreed, swallowing the uneasy feeling pressing against her chest. The yacht gleamed like a floating palace. Servants carried trays of champagne while music drifted into the salty air. Guests laughed, posed for photos, and praised Mama Efua for her generosity. Amelie smiled politely, yet her eyes caught things others missed. Mama Efua leaned into Kwame more often than usual, whispering words that made him stiffen and avoid Amelie's gaze. Sometimes they both fell silent the moment she walked past, exchanging glances heavy with secrets. Amelie told herself she was imagining things, but her heart whispered otherwise. Night fell, calm and still. The party slowed, and guests disappeared into their cabins. Amelie stepped out onto the deck, craving fresh air. The ocean stretched black and endless beneath the stars, the waves licking the sides of the yacht with a steady rhythm. For a moment, she let herself breathe, holding the railing, listening to the water. Then footsteps echoed behind her. It was Mama Efua. Her smile glowed faintly in the moonlight, but her eyes were hard, unblinking. She walked close, almost too close, and rested her hand on Amelie's shoulder, as if they were sharing a tender moment. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, when she leaned in and whispered words that turned Amelie's blood cold. Now the money stays in the family. Before Amelie could react, she felt the violent shove. Her body lurched forward, hands grabbing for the railing, but it was too late. She tumbled into the freezing ocean, the darkness swallowing her whole. Salt water rushed into her mouth, burning her throat as she kicked desperately, the boat lights shrinking above her. The last thing she heard before the sea dragged her down was Mama Efua's calm sigh, as though she had brushed away a piece of dust. On deck, Kwame joined his mother. He asked no questions. He did not shout her name into the night. Together, they stood in silence, watching the waves smooth over as if nothing had happened. To them, Amelie was gone, drowned, erased, solved. The ocean had taken her, and with her disappearance, so went her claim to the fortune. Back on the yacht, laughter soon returned. Music played again. Champagne glasses clinked. No one spoke of Amelie. No one asked. She was a ghost already, a problem they believed the sea had buried forever. But deep beneath the stars, in the cold arms of the Atlantic, Amelie's fight for life was only beginning. The sea was merciless. Amelie's body hit the water with a force that knocked the breath out of her. She kicked and clawed against the waves, swallowing mouthfuls of salt water as the yacht's lights drifted farther and farther away. The cold wrapped around her bones, dragging her down like chains. She wanted to scream, but her lungs burned. For a terrifying moment, she almost let go, ready to surrender to the ocean. Then her hand brushed against a piece of wooden debris floating near her, a broken plank from the yacht's supplies. She clung to it with everything she had, her nails digging deep into the splintered wood. Hours passed. The stars blurred above her, the waves tossing her small body like a toy. She prayed silently, whispering her father's words from childhood. God does not abandon his own. Just as her strength began to fade, the sound of a small paddle slicing through water reached her ear. A lantern flickered in the distance. She tried to shout, but only a hoarse cry left her lips. The fisherman's canoe glided closer, guided by instinct more than sight. Kojo, a man who lived on the sea every day of his life, spotted the weak movement in the water. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his boat. She was half-conscious, drenched, shivering, and broken. He wrapped her in an old cloth and rowed back to his village, whispering encouragement she was too weak to hear. When Amelie woke, she was lying on a bamboo mat inside a tiny hut. Children peeked at her shyly from the doorway, while a woman stirred a pot of soup over an open fire. The air smelled of fish and smoke, so different from the polished perfumes of the mansion she had called home. Here, the floors were dusty, the walls rough, but the air was filled with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Kojo told the villagers she had washed ashore, a stranger carried by the tide. Amelie kept her real name locked inside her chest. She couldn't risk it. If Mama Efua believed she was dead, then dead she would remain, at least for now. She introduced herself only as Amma, a simple woman with nowhere else to go. The villagers asked no further questions. They gave her food, shelter, and kindness without price. Days turned into weeks. Amelie helped mend fishing nets, learned to gut fish, and carried baskets with the women. She listened to their laughter, the way neighbors cared for each other, how even the poorest family would share a meal with someone in need. It was love in its rawest form, so different from the greed and secrets she had drowned in at the mansion. At night, lying on her mat under the thatched roof, Amelie thought about Mama Efua's whisper. Now the money stays in the family. Those words burned her more than the salt in her wounds. She wasn't just a victim, she was a survivor. Her silence was her armor. Let them celebrate her death. Let them think they had won. Because when she returned, it would not be quietly. It would be the storm they never saw coming. Accra had never seen a funeral quite like it. White tents rose like castles in the middle of the city, decorated with gold ribbons and giant photographs of Amelie smiling sweetly in happier time. The streets outside were filled with expensive cars, their engines purring as important guests stepped out in black lace and fine Kent cloth. Choirs sang hymns, cameras flashed, and the air smelled of roses. To the world, it was a grand farewell to a beloved daughter-in-law who had been tragically taken by the sea. But inside the family, the truth was far colder. There was no coffin, no body, only a closed casket draped in white satin to keep up appearances. Guests whispered about how the waves had stolen Amelie, leaving nothing for her loved ones to bury. Some called it destiny. Others said it was punishment from the ancestors. But the ones closest to the front row, the Mensa family, knew better. Their faces were stiff with grief for the cameras, but beneath the surface, their hearts were light with victory. Mama Efua sat like a queen on her throne, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. She received condolences with a trembling voice, thanking people for their prayers, but when her head turned slightly, her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. To her, this funeral was not about loss. It was about erasure. Amelie's name was being buried without a body, her existence reduced to a photograph and some staged tears. With every hymn sung, Mama Efua's grip on the family fortune grew tighter. Kwame stood beside her, dressed in a fine black agbada, his face pale and blank. People mistook his silence for grief, praising him as a strong young widower. But those who looked closely could see the way his mother's hand lingered on his arm, guiding his movements, speaking for him when questions were asked. Whatever part of him had once belonged to Amelie now belonged entirely to Mama Efua. His inheritance had grown, his power had expanded, but so had his chains. He was no longer his own man, he was his mother's puppet. The city, of course, had its own stories. Accra thrives on gossip, and Amelie's mysterious drowning became the topic in salons, markets, and church pews. Some whispered that she had been careless, standing too close to the edge of the yacht. Others raised eyebrows, suggesting foul play, hinting that no one really knew what happened that. Still, the official narrative, the one polished by Mama Efua's money and influence, was that it was nothing but a tragic accident. As the last song echoed through the tents and guests began to leave with plates of food and bottles of expensive wine, Mama Efua allowed herself a long, slow breath. The chapter was closed. Amelie was gone, the fortune was safe, and the world still respected her as the grieving matriarch. What she didn't know was that somewhere far from the polished streets of Accra, the woman she had tried to erase was still breathing, still watching, and quietly waiting for her day to return. Months passed like whispers in the wind. In the small fishing village, Amelie's body healed, but more importantly, her spirit hardened. The grief that once drowned her slowly turned into fire. She could no longer see herself as the weak woman who had clung to driftwood in the middle of the ocean. She was alive when she was supposed to be dead. That alone was power, and she was going to use it. Kojo, the fisherman who had saved her, became her closest friend. He never asked questions about her past, but one day, while they sat by the shore mending nets, Amelie finally spoke. She didn't tell him everything, only enough to make him understand that her death had been no accident. Kojo listened quietly, his dark eyes full of loyalty, then told her something that changed everything. His cousin was a lawyer in Accra, a man who knew the city's courts, its corruption, and the loopholes the powerful used to hide their crime. Through Kojo, Amelie met the cousin in secret. Letters were exchanged carefully, hidden in baskets of fish carried to the city. The lawyer was shocked when he realized who she was, Amelie Mensah, the woman the whole city thought was gone. But he didn't betray her. Instead, he helped her begin piecing together the truth. Slowly, they gathered evidence. Bank records with forged signatures, properties sold illegally, and secret accounts stuffed with stolen money. Each paper, each document, was another nail in Mama Efua's coffin. The more Amelie learned, the clearer it became. Her legal rights had never disappeared. The will of her father-in-law still protected her. No amount of staged funerals or crocodile tears could erase her name from those documents. She was still entitled to her share of the fortune, nearly $100 million. The money itself no longer tempted her. It was the justice that burned in her chest. She wanted Mama Efua to watch everything she had schemed for crumble in her own hand. Amelie did not rush. She knew a storm only has power if it builds quietly, slowly, and then strikes without warning. So she remained in the village, helping the women dry fish and carrying water from the well, all while planning her return. At night, she wrote notes by lantern light, sketching out exactly how she would reappear, when, where, and in front of whom. Every detail mattered. If she came back quietly, Mama Efua would bury the story. But if she came back at the height of Mama Efua's glory, in front of the right people, the truth would explode like thunder. The villagers thought Amelie was just a quiet woman with sad eyes and a gentle smile. They didn't know she was preparing for war. Her silence had fooled even the sea. And now, when she finally walked back into Accra, it would not be as the victim who drowned. It would be as the storm no one expected. The banquet was Mama Efua's masterpiece. Chandeliers sparkled like captured stars above the long dining hall. Politicians, business partners, and society's most polished faces sat around tables covered in gold-trimmed plates and crystal glasses. Laughter echoed against the marble walls. Music played softly in the background, and Mama Efua sat at the head of the table like a queen entertaining her. She wore black and gold lace, her jewelry heavy and bright, every detail designed to remind people of her power. To the world, she was the grieving matriarch who had turned her sorrow into strength. Kwame sat by her side, quiet as always. His smile was weak, his eyes tired, but no one dared question him. He was a young man still under his mother's shadow, a widower, the guests pitted, though some whispered he had moved on too easily. Still, no one in that room doubted one thing. Amelie was gone forever. The sea had swallowed her, and her story was over. Then, just as dessert was being served, the doors at the far end of the hall creaked open. At first, no one paid attention, but when the room fell silent, every head turned. Amelie stood there, alive. She wore a simple white dress that flowed like water, her hair loose around her shoulders, her skin glowing with strength and quiet fire. She looked like a spirit stepped out of the grave, but her eyes, steady, unflinching, were all too human. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Forks dropped against plates. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of shocked hearts. Mama Efua's face drained of all color. Her body trembled, her hand clutched her chest, and with a low gasp, she fainted against her chair. Guests rushed to her side, but their eyes never left Amelie. Kwame stood up so suddenly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His mouth opened and closed like he had forgotten how to speak. His voice cracked as he finally stuttered. Amelie? But you drowned. His fear was raw, his shock too real to hide. The guests began to whisper, their voices spreading like wildfire through the hall. She's alive. Is it a ghost? No, it's really her. Amelie is alive. Amelie walked forward slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing louder than last. She did not rush, did not tremble. She carried herself like someone who had faced death and returned stronger than before. When she reached the center of the hall, she stopped, looked around at the faces that had mourned her with fake tears, and let a small smile touch her lips. "Did you miss me?" she said softly, her voice carrying through the silence like a blade. The hall erupted. Some gasped, some clapped hands over their mouths, others simply stared, too stunned to move. In that moment, it was clear. Amelie's story was not over. It was only just beginning. The banquet hall was still buzzing with gasps when Amelie raised her hand, silencing the room. Her calmness unsettled everyone. She looked like a woman who had nothing to fear, a woman who had already won. Kwame's lips trembled, Mama Efua stirred weakly in her chair, and the guests leaned forward, waiting for what would come next. Amelie reached into the small white clutch she carried and pulled out a thick envelope. "You buried me with lies," she said softly, her eyes locked on Mama Efua. "But the truth has its own way of rising." Her words cut through the air, sharper than any knife. From the envelope, she drew out papers, official documents stamped with the court's seal. She held them high enough for everyone to see. "This," she continued, "is proof that I am still the legal beneficiary of my father-in-law's estate. Nothing has changed. Not even death can erase my name from the will." The room erupted with shocked whispers. People reached for their phones, already texting the news. Mama Efua tried to sit up straighter, her voice shaking with rage. "Those papers mean nothing. You don't belong here." But before she could continue, the double doors of the hall opened again. Lawyers in dark suits entered, followed closely by men carrying cameras and microphones. Journalists pushed forward, flashes from their cameras lighting up the hall like lightning. Amelie didn't flinch. "I invited them," she said, her voice steady, "because the world deserves to see the truth." The lawyers laid more documents on the dining table, right in front of the guests. Bank statements, property transfers, signatures forged with shaky hands. One of the lawyers spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "These papers show repeated theft and fraud committed by Mama Efua, including transferring millions into hidden accounts. The evidence is overwhelming." Gasps spread across the room. The once respected matriarch, the woman praised in churches and honored at charity events, was being stripped bare in front of her own guests. People whispered in disbelief, some covering their mouths in shock, others already recording the scandal on their phone. Mama Efua's hands shook as she grabbed at the papers, her voice cracking. "Lies. All lies." But the signatures betrayed her, the numbers glared back at her. Her empire of control was crumbling in real time. Kwame stood frozen, his face pale, realizing the mother he had trusted had pulled him into a pit of corruption. Amelie's voice rose again, calm but commanding. "You pushed me into the sea, thinking I would vanish. But I rose from the water with proof of who you really are. You buried me with greed, Mama Efua. Tonight you bury yourself." Cameras clicked. Journalists shouted questions. The hall was no longer a banquet. It had turned into a courtroom and a stage for Mama Efua's downfall. By the time the night ended, her reputation would be destroyed, her power ripped away, and her name stained forever. The room was still heavy with shock when Amelie lifted her chin and smiled, a calmness spreading across her face. The lawyers and journalists were still buzzing. Mama Efua was slumped in her chair in disbelief, and Kwame looked like a man who had seen a ghost. But Amelie wasn't finished. What she had revealed so far was only the beginning. She stepped forward and spoke clearly so every guest could hear. Yes, I have my rightful share of this inheritance. Yes, the court has recognized my place in this family, but I will not hold on to riches built on lies and blood. Instead, I will use what was meant to destroy me to give life to others. Her voice carried across the hall, firm and unshaken. Whispers spread again. People leaned closer, confused. What does she mean? Someone asked. Emily let her words fall slowly, deliberately. I am transferring my entire share into a foundation that will support struggling fishermen, poor families, and children who need education. The first community that will benefit is the small fishing village that saved my life when your family tried to end it. Gasps broke out. Some guests clapped their hands together in disbelief. Others sat frozen, stunned by her boldness. Then the doors opened once more. This time it wasn't lawyers or journalists. It was Kojo, the fisherman who had pulled her from death, with his worn sandals, simple shirt, and quiet dignity. Behind him stood two village elders, their faces weathered by sun and sea. The contrast was striking. Among glittering gowns and sharp suits, Kojo looked like he didn't belong. Yet Emily walked to him, took his hand, and led him forward as though he was the most honored guest of the night. The cameras flashed wildly. Guests whispered, "Who is he? Why is he here?" Emily answered for them. "This is Kojo, the man who saved me when I was left to die in the ocean. He is the reason I stand before you today. He is proof that true wealth is not measured by what you hoard, but by the love you give." Kojo bowed his head shyly, but the power of his presence filled the hall. People who had once looked down on Emily now felt the sting of shame. The fishermen they mocked, the poor they ignored, those were the very people who had kept her alive when wealth had turned its back on her. Mama Efua's face twisted in rage and despair. The fortune she had plotted for, killed for, was slipping away, not into Emily's hands, but into the hands of those she considered worthless. Kwame's shoulders sank. He realized the empire they tried to protect was gone, not through courts or police, but through Emily's choice. Emily stood tall, her hand still resting gently on Kojo's. "You tried to kill me for money," she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. "But tonight you see the truth. The money was never yours to keep, and now it will never serve your greed." The hall erupted again. Some cheered, some gasped, others sat in stunned silence. But one thing was certain. The woman they thought they had buried had returned, not just alive, but untouchable. The night ended the way Mama Efua never imagined. Just as the whispers in the hall reached a fever pitch, the sound of sirens cut through the air outside the mansion. Moments later, uniformed police officers stepped into the banquet, their presence sharp and commanding. They walked straight to Mama Efua, who was still clutching the edge of the table, her face pale with fury and fear. "You are under arrest for attempted murder and financial fraud," one officer announced. Gasps filled the hall. Cameras clicked, capturing the fall of the once revered matriarch. Mama Efua tried to protest, screaming about lies and betrayal, but the handcuffs closed around her wrists with a cold snap that silenced her. The woman who had ruled over everyone with power and fear was dragged out in disgrace. Kwame stumbled forward, his eyes wet, his hands trembling. "Emily, please forgive me. I didn't know it would go this far. I was weak. I was." His voice broke into sobs. Emily looked at him, her expression calm, almost pitying. Her words were quiet but cut deep. "When you shoved me into the ocean, Kwame, you drowned your own soul." She turned from him without another glance. She did not stay for the chaos that followed. She did not gloat, did not demand. Instead, she walked away with dignity, leaving the wealth and the mansion behind. Her revenge was already complete. The empire they tried to kill her for had destroyed them instead. When she returned to Kojo's village, the people greeted her with open arms. Children ran to her, women sang, and Kojo smiled with pride. She was not welcomed as a widow or a victim, but as a hero. Meanwhile, the once proud Mensa family crumbled into ruin, haunted by the woman they could not bury.